Good morning, glorious croppers. It's Kate here with the next installment of Emily's Sketch Club. Today we're going to be doing a sketch on page 61 of your book. I have been really wanting to use this border that has the circle components to it. What they've done with this one is they've taken a whole bunch of the border stickers and stuck them to a sheet of paper and then used the custom cutting system to cut circles and put them on top of the backing sheet. I decided to do a little bit different twist on it. So this is the border that I'm going to be using today because I'm still working on my Nashville travel album. And sometimes, even with a travel collection, it is hard to come up with embellishments for that. I knew that I wanted to use the photo chain border maker cartridge for this one. So what I did was I punched the border and then I cut apart the cameras to use as part of the embellishment. So that's my tool tip for this morning. Don't overlook things like border punches and border maker cartridges as having to be a 12-inch embellishment when they could be individual as well. But if you look a little closer, you'll see that inside, what I've done is I've cut the circles in the top piece of the border, and then I've layered strips of paper underneath it to create the aperture, the opening of a camera lens, and that's what I put the cameras inside of. So I'm actually going to make this into a 2-page spread, since I have a lot of photos from my vacation. But we're going to start today with the border. I am using the Creative Memories Summer Denim collection. This was a special edition collection from last summer. And you can see that it's kind of floral and, you know, maybe a little bit on the feminine side, but what I've actually done is used a lot of the B sides of that paper to make this layout. I did also use a scrap from the new Passport to Adventure collection, which is the current travel collection. And so you'll see a little bit of that mixed in. For example, that's what's going to be the background, the outer piece to this border. So to get started, we're going to cut this into a 3 1/4. Look at that. It's exact. I don't even have to cut it. Hooray for scraps. 3 1/4 by 12 strip. And then we're going to set that aside for a little bit. And we're going to go to the next piece of the border. For that, we're going to cut 2 pieces that are 2 3/4. I'm working around my camera stand here. 2 3/4 by 12. And one of them is going to be the plaid piece here. And the other is going to be white cardstock that is actually behind it. It's going to line the whole thing up. And for this is one of those times where I really like to use, I save all of those paper cards that come, the 12 by 12 cards that come as the front of a paper pack. And I use those frequently to construct elements of my pages, or when I'm doing paper welding, or when I just need maybe something a little stronger to just shore things up in the back. So that's what I'm going to use for the backing of this layer of the border that I'm making. So I'm going to set that aside for a minute, and I'm going to focus on this. All right. I want to use my 13-inch mat to really line this up so that I know I can center things. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the custom cutting system to cut the holes in my strip. So what I'm doing is I'm lining up the molding marks on the template as well as the little rubber feet, and that's going to help me make sure that I'm as close to centered as I can get. And then I'm going to cut the first circle, hopefully dead center in the strip. Okay. And then we'll take that centerpiece out there. Close enough. Okay, so that's pretty good. I'm fairly happy with that. The next thing I'm going to do is come down to the bottom, and I'm going to use those same marks, and I'm going to use them to line up my template so that I know that I am in the center. And I'm going to cut the hole in the bottom. Now, because you're close to the edge, sometimes you can get the paper lifting. So just use your fingers to help you keep everything in place for that, so that you can be close enough to the bottom. Okay, and this did shift a little, so I'm going to put this back in place. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing at the top. And what I'm doing to center the paper, as well as using the lines on the mat, I am also using the lines on the, oh, let me shift this over. I'm also using the lines on the cutting mat. There we go. I was off a little bit. Using the lines, the grid on the cutting mat to help me make that accurate cut. And then I'm also using the template itself, the track itself for the blade to ride in. And that is going to help me make sure that all of that is in place. So I'm going to make this cut. So essentially what we've done here is we've used the edges of the paper to find the center, the top and bottom. And now the last piece that you're going to do is you're actually going to come halfway in between the center cut and the bottom cut. Okay, so again, I'm using the track as well as the positioning of the other holes to determine where my center point is. And I'm going to cut that final hole out of here. The reason there's not a hole cut out of this part right here is because that's ultimately going to hold either embellishments or some kind of title, embellishment or embellishment cluster or something like that. So that's how we have this border set up, okay? Then we're going to go back to the white piece that goes behind this. And I'm going to put this top piece on here without attaching it, because what I want to do right now is actually template something else. And this brings me to my another tool tip, another punch tip for today. What I did was I got this Hexagon punch, and I punched a piece out. And what I did, so as not to waste paper, is I actually punched it out of this part here, which will be covered by the top sheet of paper, so that way you don't have to cut another whole strip. And then what I did was and I don't know how well you'll be able to see this on the white and white, but what I did was I centered this into the circles, and I used a pencil to trace around it. Don't worry, there's no contest here for if your template tracing is perfect, because that's going to be covered up, but it's going to be a guideline for how we create that aperture. So we want to make sure that the top piece is, as close to where it will actually be adhered once you tape things down as possible. Okay. And then, that one's a little crooked. I may have to shift on the fly when I'm making that particular aperture. And believe it or not, there's actually a lot of latitude here that you do have in order to do this. So don't worry too much if your typical goal is perfection. None of this is going to be perfect, but it's going to be completely usable, and you're going to be able to, no one's going to look at it and say, that's off when you're done. So that's the nature of this type of a border. One more to trace. And next time we get together, I am going to have some pictures from Florida to scrapbook. So I will divert from my Tennessee album for a little while to work on that. Okay. So this is what you have. Your piece will have your hexagon cut out of here where it's going to be covered up. But you can see the pencil marks on here. So now we're going to start working with some paper strips. And the paper strips are 1/2 inch, it's a 1/2 inch strip. And then you're going to cut it into 1 3/4 inch segments. So if you look down here at the bottom of your trimmer, you can see the gradient. What I'm doing is I'm butting it up against the shelf, the table, so that I know it's straight, and I'm just matching up my end with 1 3/4. It's close enough that it's not a problem to do that. Also, this doesn't have to be a completely exact science because the end pieces on these are not going to show. They're going to be covered up. So I'm just going to quick cut the rest of my strips. It will take a total of 4 strips, 4 1/2 inch strips, because each one gets cut into 6 pieces, and 6 pieces is what you need to make your aperture. Okay. And welcome to my strobing light again. It just started coming on and off. So now you're not having a heart attack or a seizure or a stroke. It's just my crazy light. Okay. So I've got all my strips cut here. And now I'm going to break out the handy dandy repositionable adhesive. You know I love the repo adhesive. This is a great reason that it works so much better, is because you may want to shift these a little bit as you go. But I'll start with the top one, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to center it and match it up with my pencil line, and then just cover that pencil line so that there's no erasing or anything that has to be done later on. And I'm going to go clockwise around my opening. Don't worry about the ones that hang off. We're going to cut those off, you know, once we get everything in position. So we're just going to move ourselves in circles. And then I want to show you one thing that helps to really make it look like an aperture when we get there. There's a lot of spring events coming up, so make sure you check Emily's Facebook pages to see all of the options that you have for upcoming activities. Now, I've put 5 down. I'm going to go back to the first one, and I'm going to lift up the first edge and slide the last paper strip underneath that. So that what happens is, let me see if I can turn it so you can, I hope you can see the edges there, so that each one, the top portion is over the top of the next one, and that way you create the true aperture. If you look at the opening of your camera and the pieces and how they slide onto each other like that, that way you get that full effect. All right, so we're gonna keep on going with these strips. I was talking about events before. I know that one of the next things on Emily's calendar is the Allentown Stampicon show, which I will be helping out with this year. It's April 5th and 5th, 6th, 7th, I believe, at the Allentown Fairgrounds. And for the first time, they're actually having a crop on, I believe, Friday evening. So you will have the opportunity to spend a little time crafting while you're there. There'll be tons of make and takes and things like that. I know there's a package for all the make and takes, but those, I believe, are sold. The tickets for those are sold out. So you can, again, check Emily's Facebook page for details. She'll know a little bit more about that. Okay, so again, I lifted up that top piece. I'm always working clockwise and then lifting up that top piece last so that it's on top. All right, another exciting thing that happened recently is that our favorite hotel for our winter crops, the Hilton Garden Inn in Exton, has just opened up an opportunity for us to have an August retreat, which is really exciting. That's not a time of year that we typically do one. And Emily kind of took a poll and lots of people said they would be in. So we're having a retreat in August. Make sure that you, again, look at her Facebook page and find the link for that. The registration form is in the comments section for that post. So that'll be a lot of fun. I'm excited because on a personal note, my mom will be able to come to that one, and she does really enjoy a good crop once in a while. And now that she's living in Florida, she doesn't get to do that as much as she would like. So that'll be fun. She'll be here visiting. My parents like to come back to Pennsylvania. I can see my pencil line. I'm going to readjust that. My parents like to come back to Pennsylvania during the summer because now that they live in Florida for the winter, that's a good climate for them. But the summer is still pretty hot. So they come back here where it's pretty hot, but not brutally hot, to spend the hottest part of the summer. So I always look forward to that. And it'll be nice to have a crop to take Mom to. Almost there. So when I was putting this together, I was feeling a little concerned about the paper strips taking up too much space so that they would show between these spaces here. But surprisingly enough, it does work out so they're pretty well covered. You don't have to do an excessive amount of trimming. Now, you certainly can do that if you have something that doesn't cooperate or shows when you don't want it to. But for the most part, all you really have to do is trim the ends off that are sticking out over the edges of the white cardstock. One last piece to go, and then we are on to the next step. All right, there we go. So what I'm going to do now is turn it over to the wrong side and get my scissors. And I'm just going to trim all those overhanging pieces so that they are flush with the edges of the cardstock. And I find it easier to do that before I put the whole border together. There we go. You might be asking, why isn't she using the trimmer for this? But I do find that I am more satisfied with my trimming cuts when they're this tiny. If I do them by hand as opposed to using the trimmer, sometimes it's hard to get the trimmer to make that small an adjustment. It's a little bit easier with the guillotine style trimmer that we use to cut the photos with, and a little bit less simple with this. All right, so now it's time to adhere the top piece. And I like to make sure that I get some adhesive that's close to where the circle edges are, because you don't want any lifting there. You want to make sure that you're apertures are nice and snug there. Okay. And then we're just going to line up the white cardstock underneath. So, and I ever so slightly undercut mine so that it would, there we go, so that it wouldn't show. And there you go. All right, so now let's go to the next part of the border. The next part is going to be to add the camera pieces. And I only had scraps of this, but here's the great part. You can cut a couple of pieces out of the scraps. And since you're cutting them apart to use as embellishments, it doesn't matter that they're not 12-inch pieces. I actually had a rectangle of this paper as well as that 12-inch strip, which I knew I was going to need for the backing of the main border itself. Let me cut these apart. All right, so, oops, one more. All right, there we go. And then for the next part of this border, I'm actually going to get out the foam adhesive. If you guys don't typically use this in your albums, you can skip this part. You can just put a little bit of repositionable adhesive on the back and then go ahead and stick your cameras on. But I do like the foam adhesive, and I like the dimension that it gives the shapes. So I'm going to go ahead and use it. And I actually think that I did not bring enough to my workspace here, so I'll attach one for now, and then I'll move on with the page construction. And I'm still waffling on what I want to do for my title as well, so I will I'll do that off camera and then post the finished layout on the Sketch Club page, so you'll be able to see that. But at least you will see with the smallest size of the foam square, what I did was I took one and I cut it in half diagonally, and then I have the smallest size fits around there so it won't show. And then what I typically do is I stick it to my multi-purpose tool so that I can move this wherever I need to. And then I just go ahead and place my camera on there at a little bit of a wonky angle, and then I'll continue to do that with the other ones, alternating the spacing on those. So before I put a whole bunch more foam adhesive on here, though, I want to go ahead and I'll use my regular adhesive for this. I'm going to attach this to the backing strip that we cut in the very first step. There we go. And this is just going to get centered on here so that you have that nice color that will help to offset it. All right. So I'll set that aside for a minute and get out my backing sheet. This is what I picked for the background of my page. And here's my other border, so you can see the completed one, what it looks like on there. And then let's look at this sketch again. What they've done is they've double matted the photos. And I really like the way they've done this. I don't typically double mat that often because it does add bulk and weight to the page, says the girl who is using foam adhesive. But in this case, I really like what they did. What they did was they cut the inner mat to 6 1/8 by 4 1/8. So it's just barely bigger than the photo. And it creates a very skinny border around it. And then they cut the other mat at 6 1/2 by 4 1/2. So that's what I did with my photos. And you can see that nice little pop of green And they've put the photos so that they're more towards the top and bottom, with your title going in here. Now, I did recently get the Nashville embellishment pack that just came out, and there's a nice one of the skyline, which I know I want to use for my title. So I have to figure out if I want to scoot my photos even more towards the top and bottom and use the bigger ABCs, or if I want to use the smaller ABC stickers. But this is this was my tour on the General Jackson steamboat, so that's a lot to fit in that space. So I still have to think about that just a little bit before I do it and figure out exactly what my embellishments are going to be on my border. But as I said, I'm going to make this into a 2-page spread. Let me get some of this stuff out of the way. So this is what the other side is going to look like. Well, now I've managed to tape my layout right to the right to the cutting mat. All right, here we go. So this is what the 2-page spread will look like. And as you can see, I've actually turned the paper 90 degrees so I get the V shape in the print on the paper, which I think adds a little bit too. And then my borders will be like this. So I've managed to fit quite a few photos on this 2-page spread with a fairly substantial border. And I love what the pop of color, the contrast of color really does for this layout. I'm very happy with how this is going to turn out. So look for my post that has the completed page with the title and the embellishments. And I cannot wait to see what you guys do with this. I really hope you try this border. It's a lot of fun and it's very striking. Have a great day.